Now, Jesus is on the cross at this particular time because the Romans uh, were following what the Jews wanted, and they wanted to get rid of him. All of the leaders were held in high esteem, very high esteem. So, and people, it's just the nature of people. Who's the boss? Because that's what we like: power, influence, the ability to say, go here, go there. And we learn good parenting from God. We understand do's and don'ts. By the time you go through childhood and get to adulthood, and your parents have raised you a certain way, now you might want, it's like, okay, I'm 18 or whatever age you were when you left home. Excuse me. But it's like, I'm grown now. I can do what I want to do. I can go where I want to go. Well, that's with our earthly parents. But what that is training to learn to be obedient to God. So they're ready to march Christ on to the cemetery. And we're going to start that at the 27th verse. He's already been handed over. They've had the trials and all of that. So now it's time for him to go to the cross. And you've heard me say it often, I wouldn't give my firstborn, I don't care what you needed. Take his life? Beat him? Take advantage of your firstborn? And not only Jesus was the firstborn, but he was the only born of God. And so people are following suit. The Jews mocked him. They spat on him. They did all kinds of things. And by the time they get through with all of this, because the leaders of the Egyptians, they didn't really find any fault. Now we have to understand the Jews at this point are under the Egyptian rulership. So anyway, now he's been handed over to the soldiers, and they mock him. Nobody likes to be made fun of or derided under bad circumstances. If someone comes in here and they are poorly dressed as we see it, we should make them as welcome as we would the person that's wearing a suit or the woman that's wearing a dress. Because people are people, and God made all of us. And he didn't make anybody better than anybody else. Our circumstances allow us to enjoy more luxuries, but that's it. So now he's gone through the governor's like a trial. It was a test. And so the governor's soldiers took him away, and they gathered the whole company of soldiers around him. Now just imagine, because soldiers always carry weapons. Just imagine, it took all these soldiers to bring him to where they wanted him to be. They stripped him and put a scarlet robe on him. That was done for humiliation. And when they twisted together a crown of thorns, they put it on his head. And they pressed it down. So he was bleeding from the head, but that wasn't enough to save us. Not at all. So when they put the crown of thorns, they put it on his head. They put a staff in his right hand because they're making fun of him. They're mocking him. They would kneel in front of him and mock him. Hail the King of the Jews, they said. Now that's in mockery because they were under the Roman rule. They spit on him. Anybody been spat on? Anybody here ever been, somebody spit on you? I was 9 and my 7-year-old brother spit some mayonnaise on my arm because he was mad. I beat that boy something terrible because Mama had gone to work. So, but when you're spitting on people, that's like the worst you can do. And nowadays, since we have COVID and the variants of COVID, people don't want you spitting on them. That's like the greatest insult. We'll accept somebody hitting us before we accept somebody spitting on us. You do that when you totally disrespect someone. So they took a staff and they struck him with that on the head again and again. And of course, when someone's striking you with a staff, usually made of wood, that would be equivalent to a baseball bat. And just imagine, they mocked him, they spat on him, they kept hitting him in the head over and over and over. That's called brutality. When we see police officers beating on someone that's already handcuffed and on the ground, they take quite a bit of pleasure beating them. And if you've been on YouTube or any of those social medias, you've seen it. You can see it on your television. You can see it on your phone. What all of that looks like. And in my mind, in my little bitty mind, I can't imagine all of it. My imagination goes only so far because we don't feel what Jesus felt. We've been teased on occasion, but we've never been mocked. To mock someone that's ongoing. So, after they had mocked him, they took off the robe and put his own clothes on him. Because now this robe was scarlet, and it was supposed to indicate, because only royalty wore scarlet and the purples, the richer colors. So after they had done all this, they took his robe off, they put his clothes on him, and they led him away to be crucified. As they were going out, a man from Cyrene named Simon, they forced him to carry the cross. After they had beat him so badly and hung him up on this cross, and now they want to go on to the place where called Golgotha, which means the place of the skull. They have him on the cross by now. And I can only imagine and not quite get there what all they did to Jesus, what all he suffered for our sakes. Now, if I'm honest with you, if it were left up to me, everybody going to hell but me and mine. I'm not going through all of that. I most certainly wouldn't let my firstborn go through it. But they did this. They get him up. And here's what's interesting. Jesus did not become white until the Europeans started believing in him. Egypt is part of Africa. And people refer to it as the Middle East. I think that happened maybe in the 40s or 50s. Someone wanted to change that image. They don't want to see an African. They're going to put them with the other lighter-skinned people and call it the Middle East. How you going to snatch one country off of an entire continent? The entire continent. And say this is something else. But this man, Simon, although he was forced to carry the cross, he did it. And there's a song we sing, what does it cost to carry the cross? So they're going out and they get this African man and they force him to carry the cross. After you've been beaten all night and hit all in the head and you get all those injuries, then you got to carry a heavy cross. I mean, it wasn't like it was made out of yardsticks. This was heavy because it was part of trees. So they come to a place, again, that's called Golgotha. And that's the place of the skull. Now, why they named it that, I don't know. But I do know that was the place where they decided to hang Jesus. And it wasn't like he didn't know about it. It ain't like that at all. So when he's up on the cross, they continue to mock him. He says, I thirst, and they bring him wine to drink, but it was mixed with gall. Now, whatever gall means, it couldn't have been good, because after he tasted it, he refused to drink it. And why wouldn't he? So they crucified him, they divided up his clothes by gambling, casting lots, and sitting down, they kept watch over him. Above his head, they had this sign that said, "This is Jesus, King of the Jews." They said they did that in mockery, but it sure was the truth. So there were two others, as we know, crucified, one on the right and one on the left. And those who passed by hurled insults at Jesus, shaking their heads. And we'll follow people. We will. If we believe in what they're doing, we will follow them. And anymore, we're finding people that are going off into these false religions and all this mysticism. Now, I didn't know somebody who was that. I just didn't have sense enough to know how much danger I put myself in. So anyway, they're insulting him. They're saying, you who are going to destroy the temple and build it in 3 days, save yourself. If you can destroy the temple, save yourself. Come down off the cross if you really are the Son of God. That's a hateful thing to do. But sin has no limits. In the same way, the chief priests, the teachers, teachers of the law, the elders, they took their turn to mock him. They said he saved himself, he saved others. Why can't he save himself? Let him come down from the cross and we will believe in him. For all the miracles and things that he did before he went to the cross, how come y'all don't believe now? If he comes off the cross, you're still not going to believe. There are going to be people that don't believe it. Just like there are people today. They don't believe he went to the cross. All the millions and millions and millions of people on the face of the earth. Since that time, not all of them believe in Jesus, and look at all the things that we have seen him do. He says he trusts in God. Let God rescue him now. Since he said he's the Son of God. In the same way, there were rebels. They came and they heaped insults on him. So it was like a free-for-all. Whatever you wanted, it's called follow the leader. And so whatever the leaders did, that's what other folk. And it went from the soldiers and went down to the commoners. That's how they felt. So he's on the cross. We know the story. Until he gave up the ghost, which means he died. At one point, he asked, my God, why have you forsaken me? Because he had to endure so much pain and shame just briefly. He asked this question of God. So some of them heard him saying that and say, oh, he called Elijah. So one of them ran and got a sponge, filled it with this wine vinegar, put it on the staff, offered it to him. The rest said, now leave him alone. Let's see if Elijah comes to save him. Elijah had been dead for hundreds and hundreds of years. So then when Jesus cried out again, he cried out in a loud voice, and he gave up his spirit. And you know, I used to wonder when people first start saying, black people first start saying, Happy Easter, until I looked it up. And that's a pagan holiday, which is why we now hear people say Resurrection Day. Happy Resurrection. Because that's what it should mean to Christians. I'm not saying don't give them the eggs and the baskets and color them and decorate. I'm not saying any of that. It's your house. I don't pay rent there. I don't pay child support for your children. So that's your choice. But we as Christians must understand the meaning, I don't mean Christmas, resurrection of Jesus. We must understand you can't teach what you don't know. So they need to be told the story. And when he died, at that very moment, the curtain of the temple was torn in two from the top to the bottom. Now, if it had been from the bottom up, they could have said, oh, his disciples and his followers, they just cut it and just kept pulling. That ain't how it happened. And if we look that information up, we understand how tall that curtain was. So it doesn't say anybody had ladders that high, because they didn't. So that was the point and purpose of it being torn from the top to the bottom. This is the work of God. Y'all want to see something? Watch this. And so when the curtain of the temple's torn, that means everybody can see what's going on. Everything is exposed. Prior to that, you could only go where they said the Holy of Holies. And it's important that this happened in the temple. So the tombs broke open. The earth shook. Rocks split. They came. And all the bodies of many holy people who had died were raised to life. We often say when we lose someone that we love dearly, if I could just have Mama here one more day, not really understanding we want more than a day. But anyway, that's what we say. And all these people, all these holy people before the coming of Christ, they were raised from the dead. They were raised to life. They came out of their tombs after Jesus' resurrection, and went into the holy city and appeared to many people. And it was not a matter of believe your lying eyes, because your eyes weren't lying. Our lesson ends by saying when the centurion and those that were with him that were guarding Jesus saw the earthquake and all that had happened, they were terrified. Reading this makes you afraid. If you have any understanding of what this means, we had an earthquake in Indianapolis, it's been some years now. And if I'm not mistaken, I think that was the first one ever recorded in this area. Houses were shaking. The ground was shaking. It was frightening. My husband and I went out to California. We were going into a cave, and they'd had the earthquake. It was simulated, man-made. But even though you knew you were sitting in a train and you was getting ready to go right on out of there, it's still very frightening. So these people were terrified, and they exclaimed at that point, because now they know God is angry with them. Surely, most certainly, he was the Son of God. Now, the reason I ain't God's runner, shall I say, because I would have told him, oh, no, y'all didn't believe him when he was here walking around. Get out of here. And they were terrified. All the people were terrified. And that's why they made that admission. Now, here's what's key to that last verse. We believe that Christ rose from the dead. And we believe it with everything. It's like we have to believe that like with the last breath we take. And if you've ever seen a Christian pass away, there's that calmness, there's that peace, there's no fighting, and you don't have all that. Because we who know Christ know him. And our job is to try to convince other people that this is true. Okay. Do you have any questions or comments before we close the lesson?
So to my pain, we say, how he was beaten and everything.
Mm-hmm.
But you can get a little splinter in your finger and then you hurt all over. Just think what he went through.
Imagine.
Yes. Yes, to the Holy
Imagine.
Spirit. Yes. Yes. But he still said, forgive him. Yes. Yes.
Yeah. Because if memory serves me correctly, they couldn't do 40 stripes with the whip. They stopped at 39. I don't recall ever being whipped with a switch. But I've seen kids that were whipped. When Mama said you did something wrong, go out and find me a switch. That's what you better do. Don't bring back nothing this long. Mm-hmm.
She whooped you. And on top of that, the school teacher would whoop you and send you home. She'd do it again. Yes. And if you get one and it breaks off, she'd say, go back and get me another one.
See? Yeah. And when I raised my children, after I'd lectured them, because I certainly did that, after I lectured them, and then I told you I don't like people standing up, tall people. That's how short people feel. I don't like tall people standing over me. So I tell them, boys, sit down. You got to sit in the floor. You got to look up to me. I'm not looking. That won't work for me. So I punish them with the whipping or whatever. Then I give them a Bible story so that they can understand the need for punishment and why it was metered out. train up a child, train him up. So we understand when Jesus was whipped and beaten, we have a better understanding. You can look back and see your own times you got whipped or whatever. We understand it just a little better. But just imagine crowds of people ridiculing him, laughing, mocking. I'd have killed all of them within a 3-mile radius. You ain't gonna see me die. But that's carnality. Jesus showed us love from the cradle to the grave and after. And he continues to show us his love. He keeps giving us reasons to love him and respect him. Okay. Bishop, will you give us closing prayer, please? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.